All right, looks like we got signal, and welcome to episode -2 of the Lin. This is the Lofty Lin duo.
Yeah.
The speaking edition.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm Victor Lin, and this is
I'm Tim Lin.
and Tim is the proprietor of the Bebop Sax Shop, right? AKA Tim Lin Bebop on Instagram and Instagram Live and all these things for all your saxophone needs, New York and also around the world. So this is our attempt at trying to do proper audio so we sound professional on this podcast, correct? All right, so last week we kind of did a little test episode, and essentially, you know, as a music educator, as an Asian American dude, as an Asian American male who's in jazz music, it can be a little intimidating to try to find people that are like you, people that, you know, can share anything in common. So it's something pretty extraordinary when you actually not only find somebody who shares a lot of the same sort of characteristics and upbringing, but actually shares your last name. So it's the Lins.
Yeah.
We are literally the Lofty Lins. Tim, I'm curious. What is your feeling when you encounter other Asian or Asian American jazz musicians? That's one of the first things I'm curious about. Is this something you seek out, or is it just something that, you know, well, I don't know. Is it important, or is it something significant for you?
It's definitely important to me because when I see another Asian American jazz musician, it makes me want to know more about them. Like, it instantly takes my attention. Because for me, getting into the music was a very different different for my friends, like my other Asian friends that aren't in the jazz industry. They think what I do is very different and weird and unique at the same time.
Well, I mean, I would say weird, different, and unique are pretty much described as you as a person too, right? I mean, so wait, like, let's take me back a little bit. So you are originally your parents are from where?
My parents are from Taiwan.
For regionally speaking, in Taiwan, where from in Taiwan?
Taipei.
Okay, so that's the capital city.
Yeah.
And they came to the States when?
They immigrated to the U.S. for grad school, so they did their undergrads in Taiwan, and then my parents met in Utah, out of all places.
And what year was this?
I think it was the late 70s, early 80s.
So they came here early.
Yeah.
And
because they had me in 92.
Okay. And they'd already been here. And so do you have any older brothers or do you have any siblings?
I have a younger brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they were here in the 80s, but then they didn't have you until they had been
92.
here. Wow.
Yeah. So I think they came here mid 80s, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then you grew up where? In Utah?
No, I grew up in a small town in the Bay Area called Milpitas, California.
That's not that small.
Yeah. Well, most people don't know Milpitas, but the people that do know Milpitas know it's like the stinkiest place.
Oh, come on, man.
In the Bay Area.
Come on. Don't put Milpitas on blast like that. Come on. Milpitas is, man, I love Milpitas. It's like there's like the triangle, right? There's a freeways, right? And Milpitas is the top right. It's like it's close. You go up to like Fremont and that area.
Yeah, there's like it's like the awkward city between San Jose and Fremont.
But there's a huge Asian population there.
Totally.
Right? I mean, and it's not just Taiwanese. It's actually, like, if I remember correctly, Milpitas has a big diaspora, right?
Very big.
Like, there's the Vietnamese community out there. There's Filipino, Chinese. So it's like a big...
Yeah.
So you grew up in a pretty Asian environment.
Yeah. I grew up because, my dad was still in grad school when I was really young.
Okay.
So I didn't see my dad a lot when I was, like, very, very young. And my mom was working, like, full-time at that time. It was during the Silicon Valley, like... you know, when all the tech companies were going up, you know, when there was a lot of...
So like mid-90s. Like
yeah. So my grandparents raised me a little bit.
Oh, your grandparents were here?
Yeah. My grandparents were in Milpitas.
Wait, your parents came over and then your grandparents also?
My grandparents, I think, yeah, they came around the same time. Like, basically my entire mom's side moved to the U.S.
Wow.
And then my entire dad's side stayed in Taiwan.
Was this out in the set? Did you ever talk to your parents about why that?
I guess it's just the way it worked out for them. But I remember my Mandarin got really good when I was a kid because that's all they really spoke.
So you were raised by your grandparents on your mom's side.
Yes.
Are they still in Milpitas?
They still have the same house. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. I still go there all the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I got some questions for you about that. I did not know that. So you grew up around Asians, you would say?
Yeah.
You're mostly.
Absolutely.
And now, so like shifting back to the original question, like when you see an Asian jazz musician, you said it makes you curious. Did you feel that way when you were I guess I'm curious as to how you went from being an Asian kid to liking jazz. You know, like when you start to like jazz, it definitely sets you apart in some way. Can you speak a little bit about that experience for you growing? I mean,
well, I got into jazz in 7th grade, I think, when I had this really great band director, and he played saxophone.
Okay.
His name's Paul Lorgan, and I went to this junior high school, Horner Junior High, and I just remember he made everyone in the jazz band stand up and solo. Like, there was like 10 or 15 saxophone players in the section, because, you know, in junior high, they let everyone in the band. You don't have to audition. You just, like, show up and you play. So it's like a super huge jazz band. It's like, you know, 40 people in the jazz band.
Okay.
But he literally, like, I remember him, like, teaching us the blues scale.
Okay.
He'd be like, play these notes and just go crazy on these notes and like just stand up and improvise. And that was like really fun for a lot of us.
But you were playing saxophone or clarinet?
I was playing alto sax during that time.
And you told me a story. I want you to tell me again.
Yeah.
How did you get started playing saxophone instead of say clarinet or you know?
Yeah. So in 6th grade, after school band program, I remember the first day in band class, I was so upset because everyone had their instruments. You're supposed to bring an instrument the first day, right? Like, what are you going to play, right? And I didn't have an instrument. And I remember being really upset. I was like, man, like, everyone has an instrument. I don't have anything. Why am I here? And then everyone's like, yeah, you should play clarinet. You should play clarinet. And my dad, like, I remember being really upset. And then my dad showed up to the band class. And he brought a saxophone. He said, you're going to play this. And I'm like, what?
Your dad,
like, yeah. My dad literally brought a saxophone. He's like, because I was upset with him on the phone. He's like, I don't have an instrument. So he like, I remember he like he rented a saxophone and he brought it and it was like, okay, I guess this is what I'm playing. But
why? Why not?
I don't know if people actually know this. A lot of the old Taiwanese pop songs, they all have a saxophone solo.
Right, absolutely.
And then all the saxophones in the world are made in Taiwan. So there's this kind of like weird, well, I don't think it's weird, but I just think it's like part of saxophone culture is ingrained in Taiwanese culture in a way. Because they're all made in Holi, which is like in the middle.
Wait. Yeah. Back up.
Yeah.
Saxophones are made in Taiwan?
Yeah, they're all made in Taiwan. Like 90% of all the saxophones in the world right now,
like even Selmer, Yangisawa, like
parts,
Yamaha?
They're all made in Taiwan. I've been to the factories.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. So saxophones are manufactured today. A lot of them are manufactured in Taiwan.
Yeah.
That's wow.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
So that's funny. But I mean, you didn't know that at the time.
I didn't know.
I don't know if that's. Do you think that was true back then?
I mean, the story I know from why saxophones are so popular in Taiwan is because there was this one family, and they like are in Taichung area, like Holi area, right? And they like made saxophones. They were like one of the first people that like started manufacturing saxophones, right?
Okay.
And then the family like had this like big family of craftsmen. They all used to make them together, and they like design the factories and stuff. And then there was like drama or fights, so all the family split up, and then so now there's all these different families
that make saxophones.
That are all competition. They all hate each other. They're like competition with each other.
But that's so interesting because like jazz and the saxophone, even though they are connected, they're not the same thing. So the saxophone itself might show up, but not jazz.
Yeah, not
right.
necessarily.
So, but the saxophone is just the instrument, right? Interesting. But why did your dad give you a saxophone and not a clarinet?
He said it was cooler than a clarinet. He's like, it sounds better than a clarinet. And I'm like, okay.
He literally told you that. He said,
I wanted to play clarinet.
You wanted to play clarinet?
Yeah, because SpongeBob.
What?
I just didn't have exposure to saxophone during that time.
But your dad liked the sound of saxophone and said, if you're going to play band, play saxophone. Don't play clarinet.
Don't play clarinet. Everyone plays clarinet. And it's kind of true because there were so many clarinet players in band.
Okay, true.
Yeah.
True. But there's a lot of saxophone players too, right?
Yeah.
But, all right. I gotta make sure that this thing doesn't die. This is funny. Okay, cool. All right. So you were playing saxophone in 7th grade.
Mm-hmm.
So and then in 7th grade you took a solo, and you told me that was kind of a really formative experience for you.
Yeah.
I mean, it couldn't have been just you though.
No, I mean,
There had to be other kids.
Yeah,
other kids who really loved playing, right?
Yeah, there some of my friends, they all played in band with me, and it was like band was like a social kind of thing. Like you could make friends easy in band.
Okay.
Like everyone, and like it was just funny. It was like I guess at that time I didn't think of it like this, but in a way, band is kind of like being in a fraternity.
There is some music fraternity, in college.
Yeah.
So, just as a question, did you was your middle school or most of your bandmates, were they Asian, or was it a big mix?
There was a lot of Asian.
So it was never an issue for you, this idea that musicians were not Asian.
During that time, I was also really into basketball.
Uh-huh.
Since I was a kid, like 5th grade, I started getting really into basketball. So I had a lot of Asian friends, but I also had a lot of black friends, and I also had a lot of white friends.
Okay.
And I just always remember kind of being a social butterfly to the point where I didn't know what group I belonged in anymore, because I wanted to be friends with everyone.
And you were.
Yeah.
And you kind of still are.
Yeah, I mean,
there shouldn't be a limitation on who you're friends with, right? We
Yeah.
need more of that on some level. But you're right. I think when you're younger, you're trying to define yourself by who you hang out with.
Right.
And since the tendency of most groups is to only hang out with what they know, you wind up being an outlier simply by the fact that you can actually maneuver between different groups.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you see that sometimes as a drawback when you're younger. I think when you're older, you definitely, that's a huge plus, right? And you're, especially if you're going to be a community builder, right? You have to be able to cross over. So again, let's, anchoring back to the original question, which is like, when you see Asian musicians, do you have a reaction to it? I know, I would just say that, like for me, it was so much of a non-issue because I just never saw them. I literally, I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and I remember going to a very white high school, and everybody in the jazz, well, with one exception, there was a Filipino guy, who was playing, who I think played drums, but by and large, everybody in that band was white. And then everybody, with maybe 2 or 3 exceptions, at the University of Washington, in the jazz program there was also white. So it never occurred to me, right, that there would ever be anything like an Asian jazz musician. The irony being, there was one other guy that was in there who's become one of my best friends, a guy named Gary Fukushima, who actually writes for Downbeat. And I know Gary. You know Gary?
Yeah, from LA.
Yeah. Gary and I were real close, and Gary and I were like, we're both students in the same piano studio, from the same, and we couldn't be more different. And that's the beauty of it. His personality. We both play piano, but he's on one end and I'm on the other end.
He's great. Yeah.
He's fantastic. Yeah.
But
I remember even at that time just thinking, that's an anomaly. Like Asian jazz, that's an anomaly. And in fact, I embraced that. In fact, that's what I wanted.
Well, that's how I first heard about you. Like I knew about you because you were one of the popular Asian teachers at Stanford Jazz Workshop. So before we ever even met in New York,
Asian.
You were the only, you were the only Asian jazz teacher, and
right.
I was like, because most people that taught jazz, especially at a high level of either a prestigious camp like Stanford Jazz or a prestigious university like Columbia University, they're usually not Asian.
Yeah.
And then so when I heard about you, I was like, whoa, who's this Victor Lin guy? Because it seems like he's really funny and he's really popular and everyone really likes him at camp.
Oh, he can play music too.
And he plays great. Yeah, and he plays violin and piano.
Which is weird.
Yeah.
But it's like you both acknowledge and then you sort of refute whatever we call a stereotype, right? Well, that's really kind of you. It's interesting because I would never even thought about that. In fact, even the basis of this question, it seems almost like, even just acknowledging the fact that you are Asian can feel uncomfortable, I think, as a musician, because I think at least for where I was raised as a jazz musician, we never talked about race. And it's mostly because I think we're in college and it was a white institution, right? And my general feeling is that white students are not really taught, you should think about race, and particularly in music. You know, it's like it's a thing of the past. Like, oh, we've overcome the racism. It's just about the music. There's a way of kind of like sort of devaluing, as it were, like who you are from an ethnic, or it's like like part of that is the appeal, I think, from an Asian perspective, this idea that there's an objective best. You know, I'm always told, you know, like if you can play, it shouldn't matter, right? And so therefore, if you're not making it, it's because you don't play very well, or you don't play good enough, or you don't play well enough, right? And so it wasn't really until much, much later that I even began to even factor in the idea that being Asian had something to do with my career path or the reason I felt what I did. And, you know, it was years and years before I even gave myself permission to acknowledge, oh, you know, maybe it is different. Maybe my experience is different as an Asian American, you know? And I suppose that, again, lands me back to that original question. You know, when I see an Asian jazz musician, you know, like there is that curiosity as well, but it comes from this deep kind of like, almost like, you know, like there's more of us kind of deal. And it's so backed up, right? Years and years of not being around people who are quote unquote like you. It's not to say that, you know, like, you know, you're wandering in the desert lonely or anything, but there's something missing. There's a yearning that you have there, where you were saying before, when you can traverse between different communities, you're always looking for your community, right? And I was really into ultimate frisbee, so my ultimate friends, and we go on tour. I loved going out to tournaments. I loved doing that. I found, you know, there were all sorts of other subgroups when I was at Rutgers, you know, where I went to grad school. You know, but by and large, you know, like the musician community is the one you are, you know, whether you like it or not, you're part of, right? With everything else, it's conditional on some level. You know, not that being a musician is not, but like in being the musician community, it's almost like everybody's there almost by default, right? Whether you want to be or you're not, everybody lumps you in. Oh, you must know this person. You must know X or Y, right? You know, whereas when you're in the ultimate frisbee community, you know, like you're playing the game and it's all about, you know, the relationship you develop while you're playing this game, which is probably the same with basketball, right? But then the question became more focused for me, this idea, like, is there something about being Asian that aligns itself with the mentality of being a jazz musician? Or do we bring something because of our cultural, whether it's background or hang-ups or our cultural sort of like lens on the world, how does that affect in a way, our performance, our kind of profession as a jazz musician? Or does it align to the values of what we've been given? What do they align with as far as being a successful jazz musician? And what are they like kind of hindered by? Those are some things I always thought of. And I was gonna ask you some along those lines. Do you feel like your background, you know, culturally aligned with who you wanted to be as a jazz musician, or was it kind of a contrast?
Well, jazz is like the most important cultural music, probably the most important music of America, and there are traits and very many qualities involved within the music that are very anti-Asian culture.
And what do you mean by that?
And what I mean by that is, like, in jazz, you can kind of like, well, you have a choice of sounding the way you want to sound. You have the choice of picking what you want to play. You're given freedom in a lot of ways. You know, you can choose what you want out of the music.
Okay.
Like, no one is, I mean, you know, when you're in jazz school and stuff, like, you're told how to play. Like, you gotta like learn how to hit changes, or like you gotta learn your scales that fit over the chord changes of songs, right? You know, you need to learn the fundamentals of the music.
But that's not anti-Asian, right? That's almost exactly
right. So the next one is like, and once you learn all the rules, you know, you can kind of like break them, just try and find your own sound. And like, I think a lot of jazz is like just trying to find your own identity and sound within the music. And then in Asian culture, that is not a celebrated like concept.
What do you mean by that?
Because a lot of the time when we're growing up, it's like, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to, like, okay, like, I remember, like, all my friends from my town, including me, we had like our days like planned so much, like, okay, you have to go to Chinese school on Saturdays. Monday through Friday, you're at school. Sunday, SAT prep class. And, Tuesday, basketball practice, right? And then it's like, you've just followed the rules and like, you're really good at, like what I said before, you're really good at following the rules. And then when it's time to apply for colleges and you're like, oh, what do I major in? The parents are I come from a really, and I'm sure you do too, I come from a really competitive, like educational, like town where everyone's like trying to one up each other in a certain way.
Do you think this is Asian, or do you think it's, I mean, specifically Taiwanese-American? Do you think, I mean, did you grow up in a Taiwanese-American community, or was it more like an Asian-American community?
It was more like an Asian-American community.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but you were saying that in some ways that it's like the culture to be a jazz musician.
Yes.
Right. Did you feel that? Like when you were becoming a jazz musician, or like were there some specific examples?
When I was young, I just wanted to learn how to play good. Like, I didn't really think of this stuff really.
Okay.
I always just try to get better at the music. So that was my initially, it was just my passion and like my ability, or not my ability, my desire to want to learn about the music and be good at it is what just kept me going. But I didn't think about this stuff more until I got older.
Okay. What would you say though is, you know, I'm gonna you know keep kind of getting to this. Like, there seems to be like a disconnect between Asian American culture and jazz musician culture. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's true?
Yes, I do think that's true.
Okay. And in what ways do you feel like there's a disconnect?
Well, in Asian American culture, you're kind of like, they value success in a different way. Like, a lot of it is success based off prestige. And usually that comes from like the job title that you have, like where you work.
Okay.
And the other aspect of that is how much money you bring in each year. And I think in jazz musician culture in general, like, your title is not very important, and most jazz musicians, I don't think, rake in that much money. Okay.
So you think from a professional standpoint, the values that are instilled into you, where we talked a little bit about this before, this idea of success, the metric that Asian American culture uses, doesn't match up really well with what we value in a jazz, overarching jazz community. Would that be safe to say?
Yeah.
Do you feel like there are things about being Asian that helped you as a jazz musician?
I think I have a lot of discipline.
Okay.
I mean, my life's changed a lot now, so I'm not practicing as much as I used to. Well, I still practice a lot, but I have like spurts now versus before. It was just like every day at this time I'm going to the shed and I'm gonna like learn. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna learn this, and like I show up every day, and a part of that is just seeing how hard my dad and mom worked all the time, just to like keep our family, you know, like going. And it was like really expensive to live in the Bay Area.
Okay,
and,
even back
know,
then.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, they have an expensive mortgage on a house, you know, and so yeah, just like seeing my dad like stay up, pull all-nighters for work and stuff like that. Like,
what does your dad do?
He's an engineer, and he works for the city of San Jose.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that the kind of career you feel like they imagined for you?
No. But when I first told them I wanted to be a jazz musician, they're like, absolutely not. They're like, what?
Why?
They're just like worried about me. They're like, oh, they're thinking long term. They're like, are you going to be able to support a family in the future? Mm-hmm. Are you going to be able to support yourself? Are you going to be able to buy a house or live, you know, like, are you going to be able to have money for yourself, do what you want to do? You know, like, I remember the first time I told them I wanted to move to New York, they like flipped. They were like, absolutely no.
Okay.
Yeah. Cause they're like, and it's always about safety, like being in your comfort zone, being safe.
Right.
Like, like, don't do shit that's unpredictable.
That's really interesting. Right there, I think you've just touched on something that's very, very much part of the Asian American experience, which is predictability. We don't want things that we can't predict. Like, we don't want to leave things to chance. Therefore, we want to make sure that every objective thing that we can see, that we can raise to the maximum, we're going to ensure that. So our grades can never be subjective. We need to get the best grades, and we need to do the best on the test, and we need to do all these things so that by measurable metrics, we will be guaranteed a certain degree of success, because by doing well in the test, by doing well in the academics, it will ensure that it will go to a good school, which will give us the best chance at getting a secure job, which will lead to a sustainable salary, and you'll have your family, and then that'll be success.
Yeah, like getting a B+ in high school was like failing.
Right, but I can't even imagine what that is like around a whole bunch of Asians.
Yeah, and then getting like a C or D is like, oh, I'm in trouble. And getting an F is like, I'm fucked.
This didn't happen to you, did you?
Oh, I got plenty of C, D's, and F's.
Really?
But I also got a lot, A's. I mean, I wasn't the best student, but I wasn't the worst student.
That's interesting, because you never were a victim, or not a person who is like really stereotyped as, oh, you're Asian, you must be smart. Did you ever get that when you were a kid? Or you were around so many Asians, you were just, oh, you're Tim. Yeah, he plays basketball and plays saxophone.
Yeah, I just like, I didn't, whatever everyone else was doing, whatever was popular, whatever else everyone was doing, I always went against that.
Do you think that was a conscious decision? You wanted to rebel on there was this thing that you wanted, you were conscious of the limitations that expectations were being put on you?
Yeah, and I didn't like how competitive everyone was with each other. Like, everyone's in my school was like always up on each other's business about like what grades they got, or like how much they're studying, or stuff like that. Because in general, it's like Asian Americans, I think, are a little bit on the competitive side.
Okay.
And then if you're in an academic environment, that is even like, it's even more competitive.
Do you feel like that competitiveness translates over into being a jazz musician?
In a certain way, yes.
Do you still dislike that feeling of competition?
Now that I'm older, I don't really care as much, but I definitely have been, I'm a human being. Like, I've definitely gone through times where I've been competitive with other people. Like, I did competition. Like, I did the Herbie Hancock competition. I was really upset when I didn't get it. I was really upset when I didn't get Stanford Jazz Mentors.
Right.
I was really upset when someone else got called for a gig that I thought I should have, or thought I was going to get called for.
Right.
But these are just experiences, And now that I'm older, I don't.
But in a way, I wonder if that's that feeling of that fear of rejection. From a deeper aspect, I think what we all crave is that feeling of being accepted, right? And we're always working toward that. Yeah. We're always working for that validation, right? Oh, when I get this success, I will feel finally, like relieved, right? Like, I always, and it's so interesting to kind of look back and think about how, because when you say things like, I was really mad that I didn't get accepted. I can relate to that. I applied to plenty of jazz piano competitions. I never got picked, right? And I would kind of use that, quote unquote, as motivation. I remember, oh, this rejection is going to just push me harder, right? Yeah. And which sounds very, I don't know, it's like sounds kind of like an Asian sort of thing to do. Like, oh, like you don't know how hard I've worked. Like there's a certain sort of fury that kind of like builds up in you, because once you get rejected, you don't know why you were rejected. And so you begin to look for reasons, which is one of the deadliest things, I feel like, for human beings, but for Asian American guys especially, right? We begin to look at every reason possible. Am I not social enough? Am I not good looking enough? Do they just not like me? Oh, why don't they like me? Right? That becomes a death spiral, right? And I get into that still, right? And social media is great at making you feel terrible about yourself.
It's great at making people feel terrible in general because most of the time you don't post about bad things. You only post about the highlights, right? So if you're seeing highlights all the time, it just makes you feel like, oh, what highlight do I have to choose?
Right. You know? It's like, oh, I don't have anything to share. My life must not have any highlights.
Right. But it's not true. It's just everyone's highlight is different. You know?
Yeah.
And we're all different people and we all have something special to offer.
But we need each other to really kind of point that out.
Yeah.
Right. Because and therein lies the original, impetus, which is that we want to feel that validation. Right. I think as Asian Americans, I think when you are younger, as musicians, like the validation you crave is from other musicians, right? And then eventually it's like more than it's like from fans and listeners. Mm-hmm. But then, once you realize that's all conditionally based on just what you're doing, right? You begin to wonder more deeply, like, how about me as a person, right? Do they just like what I do? Or do they actually validate who I am? And that's like a soul risking question, right? Because you can really crush somebody, right? If you just like what they do, but don't accept who they are, mm-hmm. right? And I think that's the danger sometimes of equating yourself with whatever it is you're applying to do, right? Mm-hmm. Because it means your entire worth is based on whether or not you get into this program or not. And I see this all the time, mm-hmm. right? I was devastated when I didn't get into Stanford for undergraduate. Mm-hmm. I remember being depressed, mm-hmm. right? And angry, right? Like, oh, I'm going to show them. Like, there's so much anger mm-hmm. sometimes, and here's the intro. This is so weird. I'm a big fan of like Cesar Millan and for some reason, like these dog shows, these dog rehab shows, not rehab, but it's like, they're more like dog socialization shows, mm-hmm. right? I just started watching one last night and it just really just like lit up my mind again. This one's called, I think, like Dog Impossible or whatever, right? And this is the guy from LAE. But in this one, basically, there was like a family of bulldogs, right? These 5 bulldogs that one was really attacking the others, and it was becoming this impossible environment. And so, it's interesting. First of all, the guy was saying that like his whole philosophy is that there are no bad dogs, right? Which I think, wow, basically the idea that no dog is irredeemable. You mm-hmm. just have to put them in the right circumstances, mm-hmm. right? And in this particular episode, without getting into the gist of it was like these bulldogs had to be socialized to even understand how to even be around each other and their family, right? One was so scared of the other, and one was intimidating the other that they had to literally be walked through basic socialization, right? To actually be a dog. Mm-hmm. And I laughed so much inside because I was like, what a great analogy. Not just for, jazz musicians, yeah. right? People. But like even for Asian Americans, like yeah. Our culture doesn't socialize us. We're forced a lot of times because we're cross-cultural, cross-generational. And oftentimes, the quality of the relationship we see isn't necessarily the best. We're left to our own devices to kind of figure out how to socialize. And that's a lot of times very flawed, right? And as you get older, right, the lack of somebody who is invested in you to want to, quote unquote, socialize you or provide you with that environment, mm-hmm. right? This is in a lot of ways very parallel to, strange to say, the dog show, right? It's almost like by bringing other Asian Americans, other Asian jazz, other people that have one common intersection, but maybe a whole lot of other things. Maybe we can start to fill in some of the gaps from when we were younger or even currently, mm-hmm. right? Because, again, first question, and when you see an Asian American jazz musician, or just an Asian musician, right, what do you think? And for me, I'm like, do you feel the same way I do? Mm. That's the first thing, right? But then immediately after wait, what is it that I feel? And then all of a sudden the floodgates open. Right. Because I've never been asked that. Right. I've never been asked, how does it feel? Right. I had a guy ask me one time, and I'll never forget this. It really changed the course of the way I thought about things. We were coming off this very heavy session where we were talking about, gender and jazz, and, which then turned into race and jazz. And this white guy on staff, turned to me and asked, Victor, can I ask you a question? I hope it doesn't offend you, which is always a really interesting preface, right? But he was like, he says, when you play gigs, do you feel like people treat you like you're not Asian? Do you feel like people treat you like you're white? And I remember just turning to him and saying, because I was about to say of course or yes, and then I realized, how would I know that answer? I don't know what it's like to be white.
Yeah.
What I really would have said is, I think I'm trying to be white. I think I'm walking around and I'm hoping they treat me like I'm white, but I don't even know what that means. They definitely don't treat me like I'm black.
Yeah.
Right? But that already puts me into a number of places of thinking that are already kind of perilous. Right? Because when you're around people that don't speak about race very often, things can get heated and very, very, you can get very quickly.
Yeah.
Right? But what I found is I think the majority of people of color, we always talk about race. We've always had spaces and places where we could speak about our experiences.
Yeah.
Not because we wanted to put someone down or not we wanted to say like you oppressed me or some sort of thing, but just because, this is how I feel.
Yeah.
Right? And I wonder sometimes as jazz musicians, if we start literally the what is it, the whatever that word is for the intersection. I'm just talking about
crossroad.
The intersection, basically, the most specific thing, which is Asian American jazz musicians in New York City who are guys, because that's what I am. Because I can't speak on behalf of girls. Mm-hmm. They have a completely different experience than we do, right? And so I'm just curious, sometimes, one of the things that I really, one of the things I really admire about what you do, Tim, is that you've been able to do so much. In fact, you're so ambitious that sometimes it comes at a cost. You're not able to get everything you want to do, and yet I'm watching you go above and beyond to want to serve the people that you're trying to be, to serve, right? And I wonder if there's an aspect of that is that because we're Asian? Does that service aspect, is that where some of that is coming from, right? This idea of wanting to make people feel welcome, this idea of wanting people to feel included. I just want, do you ever think about if your background impacts the way you run not only your business, but the way you actually play your music?
Definitely. Because the way I run my business and the way I play music is based off the experiences I've had since I was a kid. Mm-hmm. Everything that's happened to me at a certain age, I think from probably when I was in elementary school to end of college, has affected me in some way, given me an experience that made me who I am today.
Do you feel like you specifically, though, if I notice it, like I see so many ways in which the way, you treat your clients, is very, it's like, it reminds me of, like being in like the restaurant or something, or like, they really want the hospitality aspect, and, I remember in church one time, I remember this idea that, like Asians or Chinese people, like this idea that different cultural groups have different cultural gifts. And I remember one of them being said that, like hospitality is inherent in a lot of, Asian families, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that, like they don't say I love you, it's like, have you eaten yet? Mm-hmm. Right? And it's interesting, I come over here, all I want to do is clean your kitchen. You know what I mean? Like it's like Uncle Victor wants to come up, and I'm like, whoa, this is kind of, this is interesting. And it's like almost like what would happen. Well, first of all, do you agree with that? Was that weird?
Well, one thing I can really say about Taiwanese culture is everyone is always very willing to help each other out. Like if there's a problem, like your family's there for you. If you have like friends, they're all there to help you. Like, that's what I love about being Taiwanese. I feel like we are probably the most helpful people ever.
Why does that, what makes you say that?
Because in a way it's showing that you care more about others sometimes than yourself.
It's a selflessness aspect.
Yeah, and I think that's an important trait that not everyone has. And I mean, I hope everyone has, but unfortunately, you know, the world is the world, and you see experiences that make you realize not everyone has that trait. You know, that
is so interesting. You know, like we talked a little bit about how this is all, you know, like I've arrived at the point where I believe that music is service, you know, and, you know, it's interesting for me, you know, as a musician, and I don't know if I've told you, you know, any of this, but, you know, like a large portion of what I do is dedicated towards helping people, but the gist of it has always been because I believe that, you know, music is a gift that was given to me by God, right? And it was to serve people. And so it's interesting because there's an alignment there where it's like you're trying to serve people, and it's strange to think that you could serve people by being a star. But that's really sometimes where it gets to, right?
Yeah.
You know, because you do have to be, you know, if you want to be noticed, if you want to be out in front, even if it's just for people that look like you and me, someone has to get out front. Somebody has to be willing to do the thing that is not instinctive to us, right? And it's like you want to honor both what has shaped you, but also challenge its norms, even in 2024, even if, you know, whether you're, you know, 20, 15, 30, 50, right? You know, again, back to that first question. When you see an Asian musician, like, what do you think?
I want to know what got them into this music. Like, why are they playing jazz? Like, why jazz? Like, why aren't you a doctor, engineer, dentist, or something else? What led you to here? I'm so curious. It's really interesting to me.
Have you had many conversations with other Asian jazz musicians?
I think I've had a lot of conversations with you about it and with my roommate about it because we're from the same, you know, town. But
what do you want to know? What do you think? What are you curious as we go on the podcast journey?
I'm curious what drives them, because I think part of it is there's something in your soul that compels you to like continue to pursue this music. Like there's so many aspects of jazz too that I think turn off a lot of people.
Okay. Because
in a way, I think I'm just speaking the music industry in general. It's not a full meritocracy. Like you could be the best player and have zero fans or zero gigs. And you can also be one of the worst players, but you have a really good thing that you've learned how to navigate in the scene where you have a following and you can make money in some way. So there's a lot of that stuff. So yes, I don't like the music industry, but I like the people I've met in the music industry because everyone has like their own story and it's really interesting. I mean, not just Asian Americans in general.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the last thing, what do you want to know most of the time besides, you know, what got you into the music? What are some things that you're curious to know about Asian American musician stories, even if it's not jazz? Like what's something that you might be curious to know?
I'm curious to know what they do outside of music too.
Okay.
I think that's really important. Like aside from music, what else keeps you like going, or like what else are you involved with? That's really like for you, like, you know, you're a father of two, you know, you're interested in basketball, you're interested in sports, you know, like you're interested in learning about you've been watching a lot of anime and stuff like that, and because of those experiences, it's influencing what you're hearing in the music right now and your presentation of what you're doing right now with music. So I think that's really interesting when like
right. It's almost like you're kind of like this Asian American life. It's almost like it's cool you're a musician. What does that music tell you about what you're doing outside of it?
Right.
Yeah, I struggle sometimes with this idea that, like there are things that are Asian and there's things that are universal. And there's things that are Asian American and there's things that's universal.
Yeah.
Right? And even in doing like a podcast or a show, you run the risk of saying, oh, this is only for this. But in reality, like everyone who's human should be able to take something from everybody else's human experience.
Yeah.
Which is not to take away, though, from there are very specific things that only apply to this very, very specific demographic.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about that demographic because if I can get more and more of that, then maybe I'll have the confidence to speak on behalf of that demographic, which will then open it up to things that are, a little more general, a little more broad. Mm-hmm. So I think that'll do it for episode -2.
It's a lot today.
It's a lot today. Again, my guest or co-host or host, literally, of the Bebop Sax Shop here in New York City. This is Tim Lin, my semi-co-host / loft rentee owner, provider of great breakfast sandwiches. Got any last things you want to say, Tim, before we cut this off?
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Hopefully, we'll do one with Vincent soon.
We'll do plenty. Oh, yeah, the razor. Never mind. We're not going to talk about the razor blade that's on there, I think. Okay. All right. Peace, y'all.
How long was that?
I'm not sure. Probably about 45 minutes, okay? Not bad. That's good, because you got 2 videos going.